Hello viewers, I am Dr. Sunita Dhal, Faculty, School of Gender and Development Studies, IGNOU, and welcome to the course MGPE 012 Women and Peace. And today we are going to discuss the first unit of the course on women and peace. And today's lecture is on social construction of gender. And we are going to also follow the part 2 of this video, that will be something related to women and society. So, before we have a discussion on the interrelationship between women and society, let us understand what is the meaning of gender, and I am sure you must have an understanding of gender, but we are going to look at gender from a theoretical position as well as from a feminist lens. And with this, I welcome all of you to the course MGPE 012 Women and Peace. Learning outcomes. After watching this video, you will be able to comprehend why gender is a valid social category to understand social realities, analyze what are certain basic theoretical positions as well as key terms to discuss about gender as a socially constructed category, and critically reflect on the concept of public-private debates from a feminist positions. And with these learning outcomes, we are going to see how we can use gender as an analytical category to understand the interrelationship between women and peace. What is gender? And we know that we live in a gendered world, and often these days we are using the term gender. But let us understand, what does it mean? Gender has been central to the feminist project to address the question of inequality between women and men, which was considered to be ordained by the nature. So, gender is not about the biological relationship between women and men and other genders, but it is about the differences that exist between women, men and other genders, and the differences are being shaped by the society. Gender as a concept can be defined and used in multiple ways depending on the individuals how they are using it. The world in which we live is shaped by gender, yet gender is embodied, lived and experienced by women and men in specific way. Therefore, gender cannot be abstracted from social practices and relations within which it is enmeshed. According to Jackson and Scott 2002, gender is thus a social structural phenomenon which is produced, negotiated and sustained in everyday social interaction. The difference between biological sex and the social category of gender has been widely debated by feminist scholars over the decades of 20th century. This distinction between sex and gender has been discussed within the two polarized broader theoretical positions such as biological essentialism and social constructionism. The basic question is whether sex, the maleness or the femaleness, causes the gender which is culturally constructed, which means that gender implies notions of femininity and masculinity. Let's take a simple example of our behavior. Why a girl behaves like a girl, why a boy behaves like a boy. So, there is a construction of femininity and masculinity, and that inform us we are born as a boy or a girl or other gender. Two polarized positions described as biological essentialism and social constructionism debated on this question, which means biological essentialism primarily stresses on the biological differences that exist across the gender. Therefore, it is a fixed category. However, social constructionism debated that gender itself is a cultural construction. Therefore, it is not a fixed category. It changes over time across and between cultures. Biological essentialism argues that social roles and psychological attributes of females and males is a direct product of biological factors. These factors are still operative in its nature. Social constructionism emphasizes that gender is socially constructed in nature. Traits or behavior of individuals are largely shaped by the socialization process, social norms and practices. This position helps us to see how our behavior is organized and created through social interaction. Gender, along with other social institutions such as family, marriage, caste, class, religion, and ethnicity, shapes the social structure of the past and the present. Therefore, if we are talking about in fact women and peace, in this we are intersecting gender, peace and society, where institutions like family, marriage, caste, religion, ethnicity, disability, sexuality all can play an important role in the understanding of gender. Gender roles and expectations are learned behavior. Therefore, they can change over time and vary between and within the culture. To quote, systems of social differentiation such as political status, class, ethnicity, physical and mental disability, age and more modify gender roles. The concept of gender is vital because applied to social analysis, it reveals how women's subordination or men's domination is socially constructed. As such, the subordination can be changed or ended. It is not biologically predetermined, nor it is fixed forever, unquote. Let us understand other key concepts of gender and which will actually help you to expand the analysis or the analytical category of gender, and you can use the category of gender to carry out more research or to see how society behaves in a particular way in relation to different genders. Gender stereotypes, and I am sure you may be familiar with the terms, and often in our daily conversation we use the word stereotype. Gender stereotypes are beliefs held about the behavior traits, characteristics and activity domains associated with women and men. As a result of change in social activities, gender stereotypes are neither perpetual nor static in nature. Empowerment. It is a complex process when it concerns people who have subordinated and marginalized and who need to develop capabilities for exercising choices, decision making and acquire resources. It is a collective process in which empowered women can make their own choices and exert influence upon the factors those affect their lives. Equal opportunities. Equal opportunities for women and men in societies are constrained by barriers including economic, political and social participation. These barriers are often subtle and shaped by deep-rooted cultural beliefs and existing social structure. Gender equality as a term or as a concept exists when women and men both make choices individually without being constrained by their gender roles. In a gender equal society, differences between women and men are recognized with equal respect. And now we move on to gender justice. It is beyond gender equality. So when we are talking about gender justice, is actually asking for bringing transformation in the economic and the social system. And the transformation can only happen when we question the existing economic and social system which is dominating in nature or the androcentric nature of the system, and therefore collectively we can bring about gender justice or create a gender just society. Apart from these key concepts, let us discuss some of the theoretical positions and in relation to understanding of gender in everyday life. The most important theoretical position what I am going to speak about now in the second half of this lecture is on public and private dichotomy. And what is the meaning of public and private dichotomy? According to the liberal political thought, the concept of public and private spheres were conceptualized in connection with the relationship of individual with the state. Initially, the operation of the state was limited to the activities of the public sphere. Thus, it excluded the abuse and the problems committed in the sphere of the private. More so, the opposition and distinction between public and private was taken as natural, normative, trans-historical and trans-cultural within liberal political thought. The public sphere encompasses the domains of business, economy, education, politics and law, and the sphere of the private comprises of the domestic domain that includes family, which has been considered as sites of women's subordination. Feminists have challenged this distinction between public and private as natural and universal to every society, broadly under two conceptual accounts, which include women's location within the private sphere, leading to the systematic exclusion of women from public life, and the emphasis on the political nature of the private sphere, which includes family, marriage and kinship. I know that still in the society across the globe, the difference between public and private exists. However, you could see there are some changes in the private sphere as well, and there are some changes in the public sphere because of the women's movement as well as gender sensitive policies which has been brought by the different states. Therefore, the division has denied the right to equality for women both within family and in the public domain. This dichotomy is also visible in all the spheres of life, starting from law, human rights, work and economy, science and in the state participation. This has severe implications for women's access to education, livelihood and justice. Feminists thus have rejected such an absolute separation of the private from the public life. For example, the gender division of labor has not only created the notion of unpaid female labor within the family and women's access to undervalued jobs in the labor market, even though it has contributed largely for the sustenance of the public sector. The invisibility of women's reproductive work in the society is the manifestation of this gendered division of labor. It can be argued that this division between the two domains is both dependent and political in nature. How do we understand the difference or the dichotomy between public and private from a feminist perspective? Within gender studies, the question of private and public dichotomy emerged due to the gendered nature of these spheres. That is, association of masculinity with the public on the one hand and the association of femininity with the private on the other hand. Feminist writers have engaged with this debate in multiple ways. Some have given an anthropological account, while others have taken a historical account of the origin of public and private dichotomy. L. Davidoff in the year 1998 explains this separation in the context of the 19th century England. Feminist scholars like Sherry Ortner in the year 1974 sees association of women with domesticity as universal to societies and culture. And Sylvia Wallaby engages with this distinction or separation in her explanation of the concept of private patriarchy and her analysis of change in women's status in Britain. The feminist criticism of this dichotomy centers around the questions including where and why this dividing line is being drawn between these spheres and whether there is a need to draw this line and so on and so forth. Broadly, the demand for equal rights for women and men within family and the political domain has been an essential feature of feminist struggle. Some feminists of the 19th century, historically, have accepted the principle of separate spheres, but they propagated that the two spheres are equally important and valuable in the analysis of individualism and the development of an egalitarian state. The contemporary feminist critique of the private-public dichotomy has considered domestic life as exclusively private in nature, but equal in significance. Therefore, you could see that when in gender studies, there has always been a significance debate on the unpaid labor or restructuring of the household labor. However, the struggle is still going on for feminist or for the scholars of gender studies. The private is not free from political influence of the public. Therefore, both private and public, they may be separate, but they are interrelated with each other when it comes to bringing about gender just society. Feminist discussion on public and private dichotomy centers around the following important debates such as nature culture, personal is political, and difference equality debate. We will not get into the details of these debates. Today, towards the 1980s, when women in democratic nations had owned the right to citizenship and achieved the status of equal voting rights with men, the claim of gender inequality on the basis of public and private division came under question. The opposition between women's nature and men's culture became central to understanding the universal subordination of women across societies. And I am sure you may be familiar with the term ecofeminism, where how scholars like Bandana Shiva, Maria Mies, they all have equated nature with women's reproductive labor. So, women and nature are related. There are radical feminists who claim that changes in education, polity and economy may not relieve women from the socio-cultural condition of childbearing. Discussion on nature and culture have formed an important part of anthropological and feminist literature. For instance, Ortner states that women and their activities are symbolized as the lower order of existence in every society. Therefore, the private domain associated with women's life is limited, devalued and symbolized and nature. Vis-a-vis, men and their activities are associated with culture. Culture is defined as creative and associated with men's activities. Ortner sees this dichotomy of nature and culture as a consequence of the separation between the public and private spheres, and therefore these cannot be viewed as natural and given. Feminists have questioned the notion that women's subordination is a product of nature, because nature of subordination and the meaning of the private and public change across societies. Hence, both women and nature are subordinated to the oppressive culture. The debate of personal is political. This is very significant for the gender studies scholar. The personal is political was adopted as a slogan by the feminists in their political struggle to challenge the ambiguities of public and private divide. This slogan has drawn women's attention towards the social acceptance of this dualism in the life of women and men. For example, the slogan has encouraged women to see matrimonial choice is not a matter of destiny, nature or luck, but it is a conscious social action. Feminists have emphasized that the personal is structured through public interventions such as law on rape, abortion and inheritance, policies of child care, implementation of welfare benefit schemes and gender division of labor at home and the workplace, and so on. The provision of child care leave for women has given them the scope to balance their work and parenting. However, it reproduces the idea or what you call gender stereotype. The act of childbearing primarily rests with the women. Similarly, there are occupations such as nursing, teaching and secretarial work which carry gender stereotyping in the labor market. The inherent inequalities of the private can only be resolved through political agendas and action. Women's daily experience has become a means to understand the interconnection between the private and public. Feminist scholars see the family as an important concern of the state. Policies concerning marriage, sexuality and welfare measures by the state have to take note of power structures that exist within this separation of the private and the public. Kate Millett, in her book on sexual politics, defines power in terms of politics in the private realm. Within domestic sphere, power is exercised in the form of sexual politics or sexual domination. The exercise of power by the individual man upon the individual women within the household is political in nature, which Kate Millett describes as personal becomes political. This debate of understanding private personal as political can enable gender studies scholars to analyze issues concerning domestic violence, marital rape, female feticide, sex selective abortion, women's access and control over family, resources and decision making, which exclusively form parts of the personal. Now, how do we dismantle the divide? Is it possible? Education for women can enable them to use the office bearers position meaningfully to articulate and represent larger women's concern before the local bodies. Education plays an important role in women's life to exercise her rights in public domain, like having access to paid labor, to choice and control over reproduction and so on. Feminist thinkers are increasingly emphasizing women's access to education and their retention in the system. Along with this comes food and nutritional security, health care, and the building up several capabilities for women in governance, science, law, and other institutions. Women's participation will yield effective policy making at the state and the national level. Historically speaking, women's participation in the nationalist struggle resulted in the involvement of women in policy making in the newly formed states. The shift of women from participation in the movements to participation in institutional bodies has enabled them to formulate gender positive or gender just public policies. In the context of governance, women's movement and activism are seen as tools to dismantle the division between the public and the private. An increasing representation of women in government bodies and other institutions is showing the dissolution of the boundaries between the private and the public. And with this understanding, let us sum up the lecture. Private and public spheres are no more viewed in opposition to each other in every circumstances and enlarging their frontiers to accommodate issues of concern. Biological essentialism and social constructionism are two significant positions to analyze the social reality on the axis of gender. Gender is not given or a fixed category, but it changes across cultures, and within a culture in a given point of time. With this understanding, we can see how gender is socially constructed. So also we will now have the second video on women in society in our next lecture. Thank you, and the references you can find in the last page of this lecture, last page of the slides, and with this I would like to conclude. Thank you.